Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Lisa Jones. I'm the program coordinator with West Virginia University's Extension Service with the Small Farm Center. And this is a 6 weeks webinar series that's designed to increase marketing knowledge of affordable and effective strategies that vendors can use at farmers markets to hopefully increase your sales. So we do want to start off recognizing our funders, give a really big thank you for making a grant possible, which helps us give mini grants to everyone that's participating. And I also want to thank our partner organization on this, which is the West Virginia Farmers Market Association, as they are managing the mini grants for the project, which really helps reduce paperwork burden for everyone that's participating. So for our series outline, we are coming to, this is the fifth of our 6 sessions. So we've talked about creating marketing plans, telling your farm stories, how to enhance your displays. And today we are coming to this big topic that is the psychology of sales. And we're going to break that down a little bit, talk about what that can look like potentially for your farmer's market vendor booth space and strategies that might be appropriate for you. And then as we go through the series, if you do have any kind of questions, comments, concerns, just definitely let us know. If you are participating live with us today, you can put those in any of the chat boxes. You can follow up via email or give a call anytime. So I'm going to launch a poll question really quick before we get started, just to kind of test your knowledge on this particular topic a little bit, and not even test your knowledge, but see like how comfortable you feel with this particular topic before we dive in. Oh, and I guess I should actually read the question. So it says, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, what is your confidence level for understanding the use of psychology to benefit your marketing plan? So we're talking about how psychology can potentially increase sales. And thank you all for participating. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And people are kind of in the middle for the most part. So we'll see what that looks like later. And then without delay, I will go ahead and pass our screen over to our main presenter today. Thank you for joining us, Jody Richmond.
And I did turn off my camera just because the internet's a little unstable here and I don't want to lose any myself or anybody else. All right. Okay, so we are going to talk today about effective strategies for farmers market vendors. That, of course, is the entire title of the program that you guys have been going through for several weeks. And today we're specifically going to talk about the psychology of sales. So I am going to refer to some different research studies. So I've tried to cite those wherever that was appropriate. And those are the 2 poll questions you just took. Of course, referring just to the farmers market directory, there are approximately 97 farmers markets across the state of West Virginia. And they did do a survey, and they do one every year, but in 2020, there were 15,000 people that survey went out to. So from our 2021 farmers market census, the average farmers market vendor that responded to the survey said that they earned about $170 per day. So that was actually a little bit more money than you guys felt. They did, however, have to pay an annual fee for either setup or their membership due of $83 per year. And just kind of the distance, people traveled about 16 miles one way to get to wherever their farmers market set up as. All right, so how about the customers? There are roughly 50,000 people that visit a farmer's market in the state of West Virginia, and a typical customer will spend about $12 to $13 at their visit for a farmer's market. Again, this is according to the people that responded to the survey. All right, so here's just a look at the data, and I don't know if Lisa has discussed this at some of the other programs or not, but the little trends there on the right just kind of show you over the last 5 years or so where the market has been trending related to farmers markets. All right, so why do consumers visit farmers markets? So I looked at several different studies, and most of them were fairly consistent. Now, the difference between this question and the question that I asked you was that I only gave you the option to answer and pick one option. These consumers were allowed to pick more than one option. Okay, so first they were selected whether or not this motivation was important, and then they selected which one was the most important. Okay, so the quality of a product was very important to consumers, and it was the most important fact for consumers. Okay, so that's one of the things that we always want to consider, is the quality of our product was the most important fact for our consumers. But if you look down through here, some of the other things that were really important are things like supporting our local economy and community, having a family outing, our environmental concerns. So I would pose to you that actually what the thing that we're selling is not even a product, we're selling an experience. So people that go to support a farmer's market are going because they want that experience. They want to spend time in the community. They want to spend time with their family. They're concerned about the environment. So they're not just buying a product from you, they're buying the entire experience of going to the farmer's market. And something that's really important to note here is that the value for the money was not the most important for a single person that responded to this survey. Okay, so it was not the most important. Some people did say it was important, but it was not the most important factor. Okay. So why do people shop at a farmer's market? Something that was important here is something called a cognitive reward. People actually sometimes feel better about themselves just because they shopped at a farmer's market. Okay, they feel like they're doing something better for the environment. They feel like they're supporting the economy. They're actually feeling better about themselves because they shopped at the farmer's market. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the specific buyer in a minute, but that's something we always want to think about when we're considering our consumer, is we want to portray our product in a way that it makes them feel better about themselves. Another interesting fact is this little study down here at the bottom that I have a link there for, is that sometimes consumers expect to pay a premium for that quality. Okay, so this little article there that's linked to discusses the fact that people actually are willing to pay more for wine, and they perceive it to be as a higher quality if it has a higher price. Basically what that was like a blind taste test between the same wines. And if they thought that the wine was more expensive, they rated it as a higher quality. Okay, it was really the same wine and they didn't know that. But if they thought it was more expensive, they rated it as a higher quantity. Also, in that same article, it talks about people would buy more mushrooms if they were at a higher price. Kind of the same thing. They perceived them to be a higher quality and were willing to pay more for those mushrooms. So who are your customers? Again, I looked at several different studies, and this data comes from a Utah study, so it is not from West Virginia. Lisa, do you have specific data on that related to West Virginia?
I don't know if we have updated information. The most common information for at the national level is slowly changing, but I think we're waiting on some national data to come back. And then we've been talking about this at the state level, but I don't think we've done a really good survey on it yet.
Okay, I looked at data from 3 different studies, which was Colorado, Utah, and California. And those 3 studies had these same characteristics. So those are the ones that I pulled out. The most common customers were female, college educated, mid to higher income brackets, and they were concerned about nutrition, environment, and quality. Now, of course, there are many exceptions to that. Your customers obviously do not have to be in that income bracket. And particularly in West Virginia, we may have exceptions, like we have a lot of people using senior food vouchers or different things like that. But again, we want to think about those things when we're considering our product. A representative respondent in one particular study here that we have highlighted there, the average person in that study was 39 years old. They held a 4-year college degree and earned an average of $70,000 annually. Again, this is in the Utah study. 67% were considered the primary shopper for their family. 60% actually had a home garden, but they wanted to supplement that. 52% were also willing to support a CSA program. 62% were female and 59% were married. The average family size was 3 individuals, so they did often have children, and they made an average of 4 to 7 trips to a farmer's market a year. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits people perceive from a farmer's market. One of the things that they think about is, of course, nutrition, and several of you guys mentioned that. People perceive that there's higher nutrition in farmers market products, and there's a little bit of debate about that. The fact that produce particularly is picked at the peak of freshness does mean that there's a good chance that it's going to have higher nutritive qualities. So those vitamins and minerals are going to have the best chance of being picked at the peak of freshness. So there's going to be things in there that are rich and nourishing for your brain. There's going to be a variety of nutrient-soluble fibers, which, of course, if you think about fiber, that's the one thing that we talk about for what? We talk about that reducing our cholesterol, right? Reducing that LDL or bad cholesterol. And, of course, if we can reduce our cholesterol, we reduce our chance of cardiovascular disease. There's also something in there called polyphenols. Polyphenols are the things that we think of in berries and grapes and apples. And those are things that can help prevent neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. And there's a lot of research going on that right now that thinks that there can be a preventative aspect towards that. So fresh produce can be very good for your brain. There are also psychological benefits. And that's going back to that study that we talked about a few minutes ago, where people are really interested in connecting with people. Okay, so they want to connect with people in their community, with their neighbors. Another thing that's really important to people is sometimes people have memories of gardening when they were younger, or doing something with their grandparents and gardening, or things like that. So you're going to be triggering some of those memories, or if they never had those, they may be connecting to new experiences. So we're going to talk a lot about the sights and the sounds and the smells that people experience at a farmer's market, but triggering those memories or creating new memories is something we never want to discount, but that's a very good benefit that farmers markets can provide. So you can build those bonds in your community, and you can feed the senses at farmers markets. So anything including sights, sounds, smells. We're going to talk about those things that you can trigger, but that sensory stimulation is actually believed to kind of prevent the aging of the brain. And those things we believe can help delay the onset of dementia in some instances. The last thing on this slide is talking about diversifying your diet. A wide array of nutrients in diverse diets can be very, very beneficial. We think that exposing individuals to new fruits and vegetables in a fun way can increase the likelihood they will try them. And we've done a lot of experiments with this in West Virginia through our kids' farmers market programs. And my title slide had a picture of that individually. We have some kids that come in and they buy produce at the farmers markets. And because it's a fun experience for them, we've learned that kids are more likely to take that produce home and actually try it because they experienced it in a fun new way. And it's the same thing for adults as well. If they're out there and they're at a farmer's market and they see something new, they have the opportunity to talk to the farmer's market vendor and find out about that produce or whatever it is you're selling. If you're selling a jam, or if you're selling a baked good, or whatever it is, something that they've never experienced, they have the opportunity to talk to you and learn about it, maybe find the way to cook it or prepare it or anything like that. And you have a very positive interaction with them. It gives them a chance to try something new. All right, so we're going to move into talking about the different senses and how people can interact with them at the farmer's market, as well as how you market your product. And one of the things we're going to talk about is color. That color is very important for sight. Things like warm color, when we think about those as being reds, orange, and sometimes yellow, they have a high energy. They're on that wavelength span that has a high energy, and they can be overwhelming if it's overused. So they may be better as like accent colors. When you're doing your flyers and things like that, you don't want a ton of warm colors on there because it can be too overwhelming. Even if you look at the slide, and we'll tell you right now, some of my slides are to show you what not to do. Okay, so you'll see that here in just a few minutes. Other end of the slide, we have something that are a representation of more cool colors. Cool colors are generally greens, blues, purples, and they can have a more calming effect. They generally invoke relaxation, but they can also take that too far. So they can invoke something like sadness or melancholy if it's too overused. So you just want to be having a nice balance, or consider the effect that your colors have. One thing to think about with color is very good at drawing your attention to certain specific facts or to highlighting things. And in this one study, 85% of consumers say that the main reason that they choose one product over the other is color. Now, this is obviously not just related to produce or anything like that, but people have strong preferences for one color over the other. So that's very important when you consider some of these things. For instance, the majority of men, their favorite color is blue. You just consider colors and how you're using them. Specific colors in marketing. Now, this one is pretty commonly known, I do think. The human eye is believed to be able to perceive differences in up to 10 million different colors. I don't know how in the world they ever determined that, but that's what the research says. Red and yellow are commonly used in fast food marketing for a couple different reasons. Red and yellow, the combination is believed to encourage the stimulation of hunger. Red also increases the feeling of urgency. It draws your attention and it increases that fast, urgent stimulation. So that's why you see it so very common in fast food situations. Blue colors tend to evoke feelings of calm, trust, order, and security. So that's why you see a lot of banks, a lot of tech companies, a lot of things where their reputation is really important to them, things like IBM, Dell, HP, banks, those types of things use blue logos in marketing. Okay, green. This one is really important to us in agriculture because what does green? Somebody put in the chat what they think green invokes. Growth. Excellent. What else? Health. Abundance. Okay, very good, guys. Okay, in general, you're exactly right. Green reminds customers of things like growth, harmony, freshness, nature, and the environment. So you'll see it very oftenly used by companies that want to seem like ecologically friendly or close to nature or evolving on the cusp of change, those types of things. Okay, so any ideas what these logos might seem to you? Any ideas about Blue Farm? Okay, Blue Farm's motto is forward thinking. Blue Farm is forward thinking. Okay, Eco Farm stresses sustainability. Blue Sky Farm is one plant, one cow, one vision. So they're using a combination of blue and green in their logos. So those are just some things to kind of think about when you're designing flowers, designing your booth space, designing anything that you're using for your marketing, that kind of thing, like anything like that. So another important element to think of is contrast. And I put these three pictures there side by side to show you a couple different things. For one, I ran them together so that you could see them kind of close smashed up. But one thing that I wanted you to kind of think about is like in this middle picture, you almost can't tell that there's a difference between, for instance, this is peas and this is beans. And you really can't hardly even tell the difference between them, right? Because everything is in the same type of containers and the colors are very similar and it just kind of runs together. It's kind of same in the left there. These are actually different commodities, but they kind of all look the same, right? Because all the colors are there and they're all in the same containers and they're all the same color. Whereas the one on the right, everything's in the same container, but they've arranged them so the colors are kind of alternating and contrasting, okay? So in general, when someone walks up to this booth, most people would find the picture on the right the most appealing, okay? It's easier to identify the different fruits and vegetables in the picture on the right because there is a difference, a contrast between those. Varieties of shapes and colors are generally more visually appealing because they're separate and distinct. It makes them look more organized. Okay, so another thing to think of when you're either organizing a sign or your logo or something like that is combining colors. One of the things that people think of in design and layout is something called the 60-30-10 rule. And what this is the proportions of different colors. And one portion, one color would make up the majority, or about 60% of the palette. The complementary color would fill in the next 30%, and then another color would accent at 10%. And the reason for that is scientists have just determined that that proportion seems to be appealing to most people, okay? And white can either be the background at one of those percentages or an accent. And this is just something that a lot of companies use to make their logo more appealing and recognizable, okay? So I just put some examples of those that you're probably pretty familiar with to just give you an idea of things that make it easy to read and familiar and recognizable. All right, so the next one I want to talk to you is font. And this slide is an example of what not to do, okay? If you just look at the slide, you would think, oh my gosh, I can't read that. And sometimes that's what people do on their advertising. They try to put a lot of stuff on there and they use different fonts to try to draw your attention to things, and they use colors. And those things can work well, but if there's too much on there to start with, it's a mess, okay? But I used it to show you a couple things that are important. For one thing, bold can be used to focus your reader's attention. Another thing to note is, in general, you want to stay away from harder to read fonts, okay? In books and things like that, scientists have determined that harder to read fonts can increase viewer retention because they have to focus to read something. That's if they're actually wanting to read it, okay? But if you make a flyer or a sign or something that they don't actually have to read or need to read, a lot of times they're just going to not read it, okay? They're just going to kind of look at it and move on. So if there are distractions in the area, such as displays and other signs and things that they're really interested in looking at, your message is going to get lost and they're going to look somewhere else, okay? So in general, we really want to stay away from fonts that are hard to read, okay? There are a few fonts that people in general think can be funnier or angrier, and Times New Roman is one of those. Again, these are just some studies that people have looked at, and then there's other ones that people think can be classic and elegant. So these are just things to consider when you choose what fonts to use. The last note that I put on here is something that's kind of come about since the technology age and texting and things like that, is that all caps can offend people. So be careful if you're using a lot of all caps, use it sparingly, use it for important names. If you continue to use a lot of all caps, people will just kind of stop paying attention. It's like if you're trying to use something to highlight and draw attention, that's one thing. But if you overuse it, people will not pay attention to it. One thing that you're going to see, and I'm going to show you some pictures here in a minute, is a lot of times people use all caps for a farm name or something like that, and that's fine. But again, if you use it too much, then people won't pay attention to it. If you're just using it on a sign or something like that, and there's not a lot of it, that's fine. But again, you don't want to do a whole flyer or something like that with all caps. Okay, so one more note on font. We talk a lot about the serif, and that's kind of where we talk about the like slanting that's there on the end, on the bottom and the top. And if you just look at the difference between something maybe more like an Arial or the Futura compared to something that's more like Times New Roman. So if you're looking for something that's minimalist or tech savvy, then you probably want something that looks more like the font there on the right compared to the font on the left. If you want something that's more traditional, then you would go with the font on the left. So again, these are just things to consider when you're trying to decide what fonts you want to use. All right, so this first slide is some examples of farmers market signs that could be maybe a little too much. And I would like to say that for the entire presentation, I did not use anything from West Virginia, just because I didn't want to say anything was a good example or a bad example. And some of these are not necessarily that bad of an example. It just looks like there's a lot going on these particular signs. So it may make it a little hard to read. Okay. So like, for instance, this one on the bottom right, it's just that the lettering is maybe a little hard to read and there's a lot going on. The one on the far left bottom, with all the colors and the darkness, and there's not enough contrast between the writing and the background, it makes it kind of hard for anyone to read that. Okay, so that's kind of some things that you just want to consider. Is there a difference between a background and the actual text enough that you can actually clearly read what your sign is trying to convey? Okay, so these are some that make it a little more legible or easy to read. Again, a lot of these are just a little more simpler. They're a little cleaner. They're a little bit easier to read. Okay. All right, another thing to think about is negative space. Negative space is just using blank or open space to direct the eye to important information. So if you look at these two, which one is easier to read? Okay, in general, most people will probably think the one with the white spacing is easier to read. Yeah, the strawberry one. And then somebody else did put in the chat not to use caps with script font. And that's exactly true. When you have those letters with all those curly cues, it's very hard to read that. So that's an excellent point as well. Okay, so when we talk about the five senses, another one we're going to talk I'm just briefly going to mention is touch. And the reason why I mentioned this one is because it can be a little bit of an issue. If people are walking around touching the produce, you know, there can be a little bit of an issue with contamination or something like that. And you can manage that by having smaller baskets. You can control the way that they touch your produce as well. But it is important to have their eyes focus on the different types of texture and things like that. Okay, smell. Smell is the one that is most tied to memory. So it's very important to have smells available. It does help increase that cognitive experience that we talked about. And one of the great things about smell is it's so easy to invoke. For one thing, if you have produce or baked goods or something like that, a lot of times you're already going to have a sense of smell there, okay? So they're already going to be smelling the peaches or the baked goods or the cinnamon or whatever. But some options to have for scent is maybe you sell herbs and that's going to be there, or fresh flowers, or just your ripe produce, your baked goods, candles, soap, fragrant oils. So all of those things can help evoke that memory. Remember, we are selling an experience. So evoking that memory from childhood or something familiar or positive can help increase your sales. Okay, so one important thing to point out is that, for instance, Disney uses scent as a part of their immersion experience. So they actually pump out the smell of grass during the elephant scene in Soarin'. They also direct popcorn smells outside of the theater. And then they vent out the cinnamon and sugar smell near the confectionery to add and attract customers. Okay, so a lot of big companies are doing this as well. So you want to complement what you're selling or the products you're selling with the scents that you choose. All right, some scents to consider in spring. Some of those herb scents and the flower scents, lavender, peony. It depends on what you're selling, of course. Summer, any fruits, citrus, peach, those kind of things. In fall, we always think about things like apples, pumpkin, spice, cinnamon. Winter, things like cranberries, juniper, mint, sage, things that remind people of Christmas. There are actually companies that do a whole marketing plan to help businesses create their own signature scent based on that feeling that they hope to inspire. Moving on to the five senses of taste. You can, of course, offer tasting at your booth, but we want you to remember that if you do that, that may involve additional measures such as food handler certification or a washing station, depending on what the requirements are for your area. But even just having cut produce there so people can smell, and then that reminds them of the taste of peaches. You know, if everybody closes their eyes just a minute and you think about a cut peach, just thinking about it almost makes your taste buds start to water. Or if you tell someone, you know, remember that first tomato in the summer, you know, almost anybody can think back to that very first taste of the tomato, and that causes that experience for them. So you can kind of start to elicit those examples just by describing it, okay? So one thing else we want to think about down here is sometimes you can give people too many choices. Okay, we referenced a jam study down here, and what happened is this jam study by Yeager and Lepper in 2000 was basically identifying purchasing decisions when people were giving sampling power. And what they did is they had some booths where they would have 24 jams for people to sample or survey. And then they had other booths where only people had 6 jams for people to taste. And people that tasted the jam were given a $1 off coupon, and then they waited to see whether or not people purchased the jams, okay? And they actually found that people were more likely to purchase jam if they only had a selection of 6, okay? So 30% of the people who were given the option of 6 different jams, 30% of those people would actually purchase one, whereas only 3% of people would purchase if they were given the option of 24 jams. So it's kind of like there can just be too many choices and people can get overwhelmed. So the last thing that I wanted to mention here is something called the reciprocity principle. And that's when people are more likely to support a business that gives them something. It's basically the natural tendency of someone to return a favor. So if you give someone a coupon, or if you give someone a sample of your product, people are in general more likely to buy something from you. It's because they feel like you did them a favor and they want to return that favor back, okay? And then the last sense that I want to talk about is sound. And if we go back to that very first study in the beginning, where we talked about 45% of customers indicated that it was important to interact with the vendor. Okay, so you are important, and what you tell your customers is important. So what message do you want to convey about your product? And what do you want to say? And what do you want them to think about those products? So you want to consider that. Consider what you want them to know about your product. Consider what you want to convey to your buyers. So that is the information I have to cover today. Do we have any questions?